Shrek 5 has once again found itself delayed. Once upon a time, I think this sort of news would have actually upset me quite a bit. After all, it's been a fairly long time since we got any Shrek content whatsoever. I mean, during my childhood, these films were coming out at a more rapid rate than pretty much any other franchise. Hell, even by the standards of today, where sequels are in hot demand from pretty much every studio, they were still going really fast. Shrek 1 came out in 2001, Shrek 2 came out in 2004, then in 2007 we got Shrek the Third, followed by Shrek Forever After in 2010. In the end, I think it's pretty clear the studio burned themselves out on Shrek and ended up running out of ideas to keep going with, hence the very long hiatus that the franchise has been on. Especially when you factor into account that Dreamworks has never been more financially lucrative than when they were releasing Shrek films. Pretty sure Shrek 2 is still their most successful film ever. Since the days of the milking of Shrek, I think the status quo of the studio has well and truly shifted. The era of Shrek was also the era of a lot of other big name films that made a lot of money off of fairly minor budgets and were massively popular. Shark Tale, Madagascar, Over the Hedge, Kung Fu Panda, How to Train Your Dragon. These films all fall within that broad Shrek era that ended with Puss in Boots in 2011. From here, they still had hits, particularly with sequels and The Croods, but by the end of the 2010s, it felt like something had begun to shift. Their films no longer got the same attention as they once did, and they fairly rapidly fell out of the big three of the animated studios, usurped first by Illumination, who's now a core part of that big three, and I think had the best 2020s of all the studios so far, so that's probably number one when you average things out. But then they also got further kicked to the curb by Sony, who are really establishing themselves as a strong contender too, with a lot of popular and successful films. When you look at the performances of Dreamworks movies today, generally, they're going to be well below the standards of the previous 2 decades. The only time they manage to do well for themselves is when it's a franchise film from their glory days. Puss in Boots 2 did well, and so did Kung Fu Panda 4, but those films are few and far between compared to their original content. Because of this, I was actually really surprised they didn't bring back Shrek much earlier. With Disney and Pixar, I get why they only took until now to start bringing back more franchises. They were doing huge numbers in the 2010s, and with COVID, it wasn't clear that it wasn't clicking anymore until their most recent outings. Dreamworks, however, had been struggling with their original content for much of the 2010s, and so I figured it would have made much more sense to bring back the old faithful sooner rather than later. Eventually they did though, and to be honest, I was pretty hyped, hence why I figured that delays would upset me. Like I said, I was raised on this franchise, and whilst people love to bitch and moan and complain about franchises, spin-offs and sequels and how they're flooding the market in this day and age, there is a reason as to why they do so well. People love nostalgia, and by having these long gaps before releasing a new film, you allow newer generations to grow up with them too, as well as suck back in the adults that wouldn't go to see a newer animated movie, but will come and see another installment of a childhood classic. When the first look came out, I actually didn't really mind it. Were all the character models perfect? No. I thought Donkey and Fiona in particular looked really weird, but the rest looked fine enough. I did have a little bit of worry about how they were going to infuse pop culture references, but we'll touch on that in a little bit. Either way, the first look got shat on for the most part, and I think that had a lot of people asking questions. What's going on? What are they doing with this film? Which in turn got people wondering about these delays. When the film was first properly announced, it was scheduled to release on the 1st of July 2026. Obviously, by the time we got the casting announcements, the film had been shuffled backwards to December 23rd of that same year. I figured, well, maybe they just need a little bit extra time, and also it swapped places with the Minions 3, which in turn will be sandwiched in that release period by Toy Story 5 on the 19th of June, and then the live-action remake of Moana on the 10th of July. Shrek is obviously still a big name, but it's going up against some Disney juggernauts, and that feels dangerous to me, and I think they probably felt that too. Meanwhile, Minions has a proven history of going over the billion-dollar mark, which Shrek has never ever managed, whilst at this point, Illumination is the flagship studio for animation at Universal. Dreamworks is now the little brother these days, and so they'll try to give it an easier time of it. Hence why moving it to the Christmas window made a lot of sense. When you look at what's releasing around that time that might have audience overlap, you simply have Ice Age 6, which, honestly, Shrek should be able to beat that. It's a big franchise too, but it's not on Shrek's level. It's much easier competition, I'd have to think. However, the news has now come out that they're pushing it back again to the 30th of June 2027, which does have me rather worried. As of right now, that's the weekend after the debut of Beyond the Spider-Verse, which is the long-awaited finale to the Miles Morales Spider-Verse trilogy. This has been one of the franchises that's well and truly pushed Sony into that number 4 spot just outside the big 3, and could have them challenging for the top 3 before too long. The most recent installment grossed $690 million, and despite this film being delayed a lot more than people would have liked, there's still a lot of hype and interest in it. Therefore, I actually think that maybe Shrek's put itself into a potentially worse spot than they were before. It does actually have me curious as to why they've ended up delaying this movie. Are they spooked? Or is there something else to it that I'm missing? The first delay, as I said, is probably for the best. I would say that Toy Story 5 is pretty much a lock to get $1 billion at the box office. The last 2 films have, and even if there's a bit of discontent that they're keeping the franchise going after yet another big send-off, It's still the type of franchise that's going to remain profitable and successful until Tom Hanks and Tim Allen can no longer do the voices anymore. We know that Spider-Verse is probably going to do rather well considering the second film did very well for itself, but what about Ice Age? I was curious about the comparison between Shrek and Ice Age and which could potentially come out on top in a clash at the box office. Taking a look at the numbers, I kind of get DreamWorks' fear. Ice Age 3 and Ice Age 4 both grossed almost $900 million, which outperforms both Shrek the Third and Shrek Forever After. Yes, the fifth Ice Age film didn't do half as well as those numbers, but now it has the power of nostalgia behind it as well as the weight of the Disney machine. That's a lot of money for advertising. After all, I think this is the first theatrical release for 20th century animation since Disney acquired it, so I suspect they want it to be a big hit. They'll want to really try to cement the studio as a contender going forward. With all those numbers in mind, coupled with the weight of nostalgia, I think there's a good chance that Ice Age could actually give Shrek a run for its money, and in the end, maybe it just didn't seem worth it. Especially when they could go head to head with Sony, with a franchise that doesn't have as much proven success as that. Suppose in the end we'll have to wait and see as to whether it all pays off, shall we? However, that all hinges on the idea that they've gone to delay Shrek to give it the best chance at the box office since DreamWorks really need to win, as they have been quietly swirling the drain for quite some time, and only get the occasional mild pump up from a successful franchise film. It's gotten to the point that I'm kind of convinced the whole company is a sort of tax write-off for Universal. So many other studios have been shut for way less. As I said, it all hinges on that idea, that the delays are due to financials and competition, but what if it's just the normal stuff, that the animation isn't going to be ready? As I said earlier, the visual side of things was somewhat panned by pretty much everybody, and whilst I honestly didn't mind it, when you're getting that much feedback, then yeah, I could 100% understand wanting to change things up and go back to the drawing board. After all, Shrek did have a very unique animated style. Often with studios, you can see that they conform to a very specific look. You may see it start to shift as the decades go on, but for the most part, it's always recognizable. I don't think that's the case for DreamWorks. They often try to do things differently and craft a different visual experience that fits the world they're trying to create. That is very much true for Shrek as well, and I don't think there's another film that has that same look and feel as Shrek, and that's a good thing. It makes it instantly recognizable, which is what you want. You want people to be able to know what it is out of context, even if the leads aren't in the picture, and you want people to think, oh, that's Shrek, and thus, oh, that's DreamWorks. It gets more eyes and thoughts on the studio, which is something that DreamWorks desperately needs in this day and age. They've massively fallen off in how much people talk about them, and for such an important pillar of the early CG style era, it is a massive shame. They're a fallen giant. So if the delays are about visuals, I presume they're going to try to find a way back to that rougher visual style that Shrek's known for, whilst also keeping the advances in technology obvious. They'll want to strike that balance between it looking like Shrek and not looking outdated and ugly. I think it's definitely doable. I mean, remember the first look at Sonic the Hedgehog and how cursed that first attempt was? They took the audience response into account and changed things, and when the film finally came out, it was rather beloved because they found a style that struck the balance of what they were trying to achieve. Is DreamWorks going to be able to do that? I don't know, to tell you the truth, although as I said, I do think the hate is a bit overblown for the visuals. I swear in this day and age there's a big internet demographic that simply love whipping themselves up into a frothing frenzy at the slightest provocation. And one of the biggest things they're unable to let go of is nostalgia for animation of the past. Thus, if things look even slightly different, the film is rather quickly deemed a crime against humanity and unwatchable. I've talked about it before on my channel, so I won't dive into it in much depth, but the reality is that people get in their feelings at the slightest provocation in this day and age, like somebody personally took a crap in their mailbox or something. However, in the end, I also don't think visuals are going to be the be-all and end-all for the film and the soft reboot of the franchise in general. All that matters really is that the film and the story are genuinely engaging. I think for me, this is something the franchise lost along the way. The first two films are honestly a revelation and very much changed the face of the animated industry in a lot of ways. By the time of Shrek the Third and Shrek Forever After though, I think they were starting to run on fumes. They just didn't know how to recapture the magic. That being said, once they were able to do something a little bit different with Puss in Boots, what do you know, it was good again. Then when Puss in Boots The Last Wish came out a couple of years ago in 2022, it was still really fresh and exciting. It perfectly infused goofy humour with fairy tale parody and a swashbuckling adventure style. For me, that's exactly what Shrek 5 needs to do. It needs to be able to do something fresh with the story that still keeps the magic of what people loved about the Shrek franchise to begin with. In terms of the narrative I'm expecting, it's going to heavily involve Shrek and his daughter as the primary characters, with Donkey also being there, whilst Fiona probably takes a bit more of a backseat voice of reason sort of role. I'm not saying I like it, but let's be honest, they definitely phased her out quite a lot during the third and fourth movies compared to her importance in the first two. I don't see that being different here. Thus, I suspect the film's going to heavily involve Shrek and Shrek's daughter Felicia. In what context though? That's the question. I think it would be very easy for them to simply go the route of Shrek being an old grump who doesn't understand his daughter, and so he tries to force her into a box of what he thinks is right and they clash and he has to learn and grow and change. For a soft reboot, I could see them doing this, although part of me does think it would be pretty lazy storytelling. We've seen Shrek have to learn to not be a grouchy arsehole in pretty much every single film in the franchise. Is that seriously the best they can do? I think it would be much more enjoyable if they go in the opposite direction. They have Shrek trying to engage with his daughter, who's almost grown up and eager to find her place in the world, her place in the swamp. Did they end up moving back to the swamp? I've forgotten. Anyway, they have her outgrow her need to have him always be around and find him annoying or out of touch or whatever, with the film focusing on her journey of growth and self-discovery instead. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, I suppose, but at least it's something different. My major fear, though, is when they start to touch on pop culture, which I referenced earlier. It was a big part of what made the early Shrek films so extremely funny, but now I'm kind of scared they're going to try to lean into internet culture a little bit too much, as we saw in the preview with the magic mirror. To tell you the truth, I think there are very, very few Hollywood screenwriters that have been overly successful in trying to make funny references to memes and whatnot, and so I hope they mostly steer clear of that, otherwise it could end up feeling very try-hard and cringy, which is of course not what you want for a return from a beloved franchise. You want them to hit the ground running with a funny and well-written film, and let's just hope they're able to pull it off, and that all the delays are not the signs of a film in trouble. With all that being said though, these have all just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about the delays for Shrek 5? Do you think it bodes ill for the film, or is this just part of the process? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.